G'day everyone, welcome to the very first episode of my brand new podcast, the Factual Faith Podcast. In this episode, I have a conversation with longtime friend and mentor and head of administration at my church, Felipe Borja. Felipe and I have an awesome conversation about the topic of good character. We talk a lot about his journey with good character, a bit about my journey with good character, and most importantly, why we believe endeavoring for good character is something that we as human beings should always be working towards, religious or not. The benefits of seeking good character and seeking honest character are immeasurable, and I believe that this conversation did a great job of highlight, and specifically Felipe explaining his journey, did a wonderful job of highlighting exactly why that is, I believe, a truth of this world. I highly consider you to think about how this truth may be impacting your life, if you are Christian or not, what good character may do for you, and how you can implement this in your life. As a side warning, I apologize for the camera quality. Unfortunately, I don't have the same camera that I'm using here while recording this intro. So if you're watching from YouTube, I apologize. My camera will be quite blurry for this episode, and I believe the next episode as well. But if you're having the benefits of not needing to see my mug on the show, then please enjoy. All right. So, Felipe, today you and I are going to discuss the topic of good character. You were saying you picked this topic because it was close to your heart. We were picking between politics and good character. Both of those things are close to your heart, but you said good character was something you felt like you were able to explain and relate to in more depth. So I guess I'll start by asking what your journey is with seeking good character, and you can add as much detail in as long as you like, doesn't matter. But yeah, just sort of going through the whole process of what it looked like to search for good character, what it looks like, what that is, what it was to you, what it is now, all that sort of thing.
Let me just pick up on where you started. I feel like there are so many juicy topics to talk about. Theological topics, you could talk about, the gospel, you could talk about the nature of the atonement, you could talk about politics. I mean, there's so many really juicy things to talk about, and they really stood out to me when you sent me the list. But the one that I felt would have the most impact if I'm speaking from a personal perspective, and would make the most difference in people's lived experiences, is the topic of good character. And it's not a topic that you would think is the most appealing or attractive topic. But in my life, it's been the one that has made all the difference, and that has made all the difference in the lives of those around me. If I could start off with like a story that will, I think, put some context in people's minds and help them to understand a little bit more about what we mean when we talk about good character, and particularly how good character relates to my life. Because the reason why I love this topic is because God has taken me on a journey from being a person of bad character to a person who now has come to value good character and sees the importance of it. And I'm talking about both before I was a Christian and follower of Jesus, and after. So before, bad character was on the next level. And then when I became a Christian, my conscience was strengthened and more attuned to good, but it was still lacking. And so I've come on this journey of seeing the importance of good character and how central to the gospel it actually is. But in terms of the story I mentioned earlier, I remember it was around 2014 or 15, I'd say. Um, and I was applying for a pastoral job at a church. Um, and I was I was I was really looking forward to getting this job. I was hoping that I was hoping for a career change, and I really felt from the Lord that He was calling me into ministry. And so I was really excited at this prospect. Um, and so I remember very clearly, um, uh, you know, the question being asked during the interview with the elders. Is there anything, whether theological or otherwise, that you could foresee that could create problems or issues with you and you being here? Um, and I was a member of this church, and I was attending this church, and um, I clearly remember what went through my head, and the difference between what went through my head and what went out of my mouth. Because what went through my head was, yes, there are so many things that you differ with them in this church, and your intention is to change this church and to overhaul it theologically. And that's going to cause issues. But what went through my mouth was,
No, it's fine.
what went through my mouth was, um, uh, I've been coming to this church for a while, and we're not very clear on where we stand theologically. So, no. And um, that was a bad character moment. And the consequence of that moment led to, I wouldn't call it a split, but I would call it a mass exile from that church after I left and hurt so many people, and um, you know, created confusion and wounds in people. So God has taken me from that to now being at the place where I've approached the leaders of that church and apologized, um, and and seeing the importance of doing that. My background, I'm Brazilian, and Brazilians tend to have like a shortcut kind of attitude where the ends justify the means, and that's a trickle down from the leadership of Brazil all the way through to the lowest person in Brazil. If you can park in a non-parking zone, because you need to go buy some food very quickly, you'll do it. Um, and that kind of attitude permeates the culture, because you don't want to squander an opportunity. You don't want to be inconvenienced by barriers and things that will impede where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do. And so you're hiding from who you really are and refusing to come to terms with what you've done, is a very, I would say, something that permeates the Brazilian culture, and that affected me. That latched onto me from an early age, and I had to live under the tyranny of that philosophy for many years, and then deal with the consequences of them, until I really saw the importance of having a good character. So
Mm-hmm.
that provides some context.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one thing that has been really interesting for me is sort of watching all of this happen
Mm.
over the period, because you and I were probably coming up to a decade of knowing each other now.
Yeah.
And it was pretty much from the moment we met, you became my mentor, and then we've gone through all sorts of different church shenanigans together
Yeah.
throughout the years. And I think it's been really interesting playing like that sideline vision where I sort of get to watch you in the action develop and change and kind of grow depending on that philosophy that you just said, which is like the ends justifying the means. But then I think you sort of
Yeah.
slowly but surely started to realize, well, did they really? And there was quite a bit of, I guess, if I were to word it as nicely as possible, I think there was a lot of assumptions thrown out, like, oh, just need to do this, and then we'll further the kingdom or something like that, or I just need to be a little bit more brash here, and just so we can get this point across or something like that. And
Totally. Yeah,
yeah.
you rationalize the decisions you're making. Um, you you mask it with good intentions and good outcomes.
Mm,
When actually at the core, if you're really coming to terms with your motives, um, it's bad character.
mm.
You know, you're not conformed to the way of Christ, and you just got to face the reality. Um, and more often than not, the way that people face the reality is either through something internal or external that turns to chaos in their lives. So their inside life is in shambles. They're broken. They know they're broken. They feel they're broken, but they don't know why. And they go on a journey of trying to figure out why, and discover that all along, the reason why they feel so wounded and hurt and pained is because they've lived basically with a bad character for so long, or they live with the consequences of their actions, and those consequences are coming from an external point. Um, Church splits, relational splits, um, losing your finances, all these sort of things start to happen because your bad character catches up to you. Um, so yeah, we do tend to rationalize, but when we do that, we're taking a short-term perspective instead of a long-term perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess coming off the back of that now, you've been through a few churches, you've pastored, sort of founded and pastored your own church for a little while, and then
Yeah.
now you're at your current church, or our current church, I guess, working in administrative matters. How has your how has your definition of good character
Mm.
changed and adapted over that period of time? Going from someone who was sort of more brash, more ends focused, more, I guess,
Mm.
sort of more ends rather than in the moment trusting in God and his statements on good character.
Yeah.
Now, how has that picture of good character evolved and changed over time?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good question. Um, Early on in my life, and then in my early Christian journey, I didn't have a matrix for good character. I didn't have a definition for it. It didn't cross my mind. I never thought about it. Um, I I had a general sense of what was good and what wasn't. Um, but when the rubber hit the road, if I did something wrong, all I needed to do was hide it. Um, and that was sufficient. And I think that was probably grounded in a one-dimensional view of the gospel, where your sins are forgiven and you get a stamp and go to heaven. Um, as my understanding of the gospel evolved, also my understanding of the importance of good character evolved, because the gospel isn't just that you get to enter into heaven's gates and you're forgiven of everything you've done wrong, but also it's a lived experience here and now of how you live your life, and the empowerment of living like Jesus. So I would say that um, now my definition of having a good character is, to me, it means your attitudes and actions are conformed to Christ's attitudes and actions. That's what it means to have a good character.
Hmm.
Your habits, your actions, your reactions, your whole view of the world, it's conformed to Christ and how he acted, how he reacted, how he viewed the world. It means, like, you're integrous, it means you're virtuous, it means you're not living a double life. It means that your life is full of good. And when your life is full of good, you flourish, and it's not just that you flourish; those around you also flourish, as opposed to, you withering away and those around you withering away, because you're honest, you're trustworthy. Um, I think it means that you do the right thing and you're transparent. And here's the key: despite the consequences you might have to face by not being transparent and not taking the easy road.
Yeah.
It means you've got nothing to hide. So, let me give you an example. This really started gripping me in, I would say, 2018, 19, where I started to experience God in a more tangible, personal way, right? Um, I I was studying at Bible college, and I was doing Greek at the time, and the college that I was studying was a distance education college, and their tests were all online. Now, at the same time, I was working part time. I was planting a church and working full time for the church, like not paid, just like time. And in the process of starting to date my now wife, and go through our engagement process. So, needless to say, I would say that was the busiest period of my life. Easily sleeping 4 hours a night for 6 months, um, and it was just so intense. And during that time, I didn't have the flexibility or the time to study a whole lot. There was a period there for a whole month I was in Brazil, starting to date my wife, and my now wife, um, and we were just so busy getting to know each other and going around Brazil and stuff. So it was a really busy period. And so when it came to these Greek tests and exams that I was doing online, they would clearly state before the exam, you cannot consult with textbooks, you cannot go online, you can't do all these things. And I did it anyway. Um, and I would Google the answers, I would check my textbook for the answers, and I was passing. I just wanted to pass. Again, the ends were being the means were being justified by the end. And so I was cheating on this test, and it came to the final exam, and I needed like a massive percentage to actually pass, because I still was barely passing. And I said to myself before the test, I'm not going to cheat. And I ended up, from the first question I saw it, I had no idea what the answer was, and I knew I was stuffed for the whole exam. I knew this was going to be a fail. And so that big F, the fail, was like right before my eyes in that moment. And I was like, I have to pass this thing. I don't want to go through another semester. I'm going to be delayed in my graduation and in my objectives in life. And I just have to. I don't want to be doing Bible college for more than what I have to. So I cheated in the final exam more than even all the other exams that I had already cheated on. Um, and I can distinctly remember the feeling I had afterwards. Like, I felt so guilty. Like, I felt so bad, and that had never really happened to me before. I think I was coming to terms with what I was doing, and how much it was wounding me, and how unfair that was to those around me. And I could not help myself but contact the college and let them know that I cheated. Um, they obviously failed me, but they were super gracious about it. And it's funny in those moments when you're bringing to light something that you've done. Um, your mind goes to all the possibilities and consequences that might actually happen. So I was like, oh man, if I tell them
Kicked out of the
that,
college,
yeah,
like,
yeah, no,
yeah.
not just that. Ready? This is what went through my mind. I was like, if I tell them that I cheated, then they're going to get in touch with the church that I'm pastoring and tell all the members that I've cheated.
Oh
And then
no.
the church is going to close down. And then, I'm going to lose my girlfriend. We're not going to get married. And like you have this
Yeah.
whole, yeah, you create this whole narrative in your head about what could happen or what will happen or what might happen. And sometimes those things do happen, I want to say, but a lot of the times they're just strategies used by the enemy to distract you from doing the right thing. And so, yeah, in this case, I got a fail for the subject. I was delayed by 6 months in my graduation. They put it in my record in their system. But other than that, it never affected me. The consequences weren't far reaching because I think God honored my integrity in that moment. And I did it early enough so that I hadn't gone through years of lies and then trying to undo those years of lies, because that's the issue with, like, living as someone who has a bad character. It's like you accumulate so many small bad decisions and lies and put on so many masks over the course of decades that by the time you have to then undo it, you've done way, like, so much damage compared to if you had just done it earlier. You could have saved yourself from all of these consequences. um like people who have people who have developed, like, a family, and they've had a family for 10 years and they've been cheating for 10 years, and they've been cheating even before they were, like, married. Like, they should have come to light about that before they got married, and that could have avoided so much more heartache now, because kids are involved. You've got 10 years of relationship and history and marriage. It's just gets super messy. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how, like, I would say, um, good character has come to be important in
Mm.
my life.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the point that you make about the accumulation
Mm.
of poor choices. The one thing that sort of came to mind for me is not only when you have an accumulation of poor choices, there's a whole bunch of damage and fallout that occurs from that. But I
Yeah.
think there's also this aspect of numbing that occurs that's really, really dangerous as well.
Yeah.
Because you sort of become this, like, you imagine someone who's on the pulpit and they go, instead of doing what you did, where you were able to, muster up the courage to be able to say, look, guys, I cheated. I'm sorry. You imagine instead you were on the pulpit and you said something like, man, I got away with cheating once. Like, or I cheated on my exams. I'm guilty of that too, or something. And then someone comes and checks you and says, did you, you know, did you apologize for it? Did you try and amend it or something like that? And then you've got a whole group of people who are looking at you like, oh man, this guy sort of got away with cheating, or,
Mm.
lied about cheating, or,
Yeah.
all that sort of thing. And like, not everyone is perfect in that regard. I can think of some moments where I have done something similar. Like, I cheated on a little small exam back when I was doing one of my diplomas or something. And it's now so far gone that none of those people work in that place anymore, and I don't even
Mm.
have the opportunity to apologize for what I did or own up to for what I did. So there's this part of me where I'm like, ah, damn, I can never amend that in the minds of those people now, and I can never show off the character of Christ in the minds of those people.
Yeah.
That situation has now been locked away.
Yeah.
And
And
there's
if oh, you go.
I was going to say, and there was just this numbing that was developed in my mind because everyone else was doing it as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah, and just to use your pulpit situation, like if you're preaching about it, or even if you're just at a Bible study or a life group and you share that, on the flip side to what you said, where people will come and confront you and be like, "Hey, that's hypocritical. Have you amended that?" On the flip side,
there's
it's
also
like, if
acceptance, right?
yeah, and if you
Yeah,
have amended it, and you preach about it or talk about it with friends in a like study context or something like that, it provides people with two things. I think number one, relatability. They see that you're real, that you're genuine, that you have good character, that they can like that you understand the brokenness of your own heart and of the world. So they see someone who has open doors. But then number two, I think it provides them with an example to live good character lives as well. Because if they think to themselves, oh man, I cheated on my test just yesterday, I've got to go amend that. Or, oh man, like I've been watching porn and I have been hiding it from my girlfriend. It's like you're providing them with the lived example of the character of Christ. And that gives them then the opportunity to amend things as well. Whereas when we mask it, when we hide it, when we don't share it, we're forfeiting the opportunity not only for us to be changed, but for others to be changed as
Yeah,
well.
to inspire other people as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But totally, I agree with what you're saying. I think um, it. What was the wording you used? It numbs the soul or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's an unfortunate numbing that occurs when you see someone who is a leader or an inspiration to you, essentially advocating for, or not even advocating for, just speaking lightly of poor character and,
yeah,
saying, oh, I did this. I probably shouldn't have. But,
mm,
that,
yeah,
that sort of wording, it kind of then just allows you to repeat that sentence in your head about what you've done.
yeah.
So you're able to go, oh, I did that as well. I probably shouldn't have also, but whatever.
She'll be right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does the opposite of what I said before, where, if what I said before was you set an example and people then see that lived example and want to follow it. If you talk lightly about it and dismiss the importance of good character, people also follow that and they justify just like you justify. And so I think, like, if you think about it in like what we're talking about now is really the answer to the question why having a good character matters. Like, if you think about most people, I think, and being a pastor, I know this to be true. Most people think that they can take certain secrets with them to the grave. And I used to think that. And, it's like, oh, that secret is way too big to share. And if it comes out, the consequences will be catastrophic. I'll get a divorce. I won't get the job I really want. I'll lose all my money. I'll go to jail. I won't get that girlfriend or that boyfriend, or like there's something that you'll miss out on or some consequences that you'll have to face if that thing comes to light. And the problem is that you think you're avoiding the consequences when actually you're creating more consequences. that's
Yeah.
that's the irony, right? Like, why does good character matter? Because there are consequences to not having a good character. And the enemy's trick is making you believe a lie that by hiding it or living in bad character, you're actually avoiding the consequences, when actually you're either delaying it or creating worse consequences. So one of those consequences, problems, is it creates a woundedness in your own soul. Like the way you put it was, it numbs your soul. The longer you keep the secret, the longer you live in bad character, the deeper the trauma becomes.
Yeah.
Like, it harms you on a profound level. And I lived it like this was my life, because I couldn't quite get my head above the water, and I felt like I was always in this cycle, and I didn't understand that the only path to restoration and healing was confession.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And so, like, you'll never be able to progress in life. You'll always feel like you're in a cycle and pattern of sin and depression if you don't come transparently and live in the light. And that's like your own woundedness. But then it's funny because, like, your internal woundedness, it manifests externally and it leads to wounding others, right? because you don't just live with yourself, you live in a community, you live with people and friends and family. Hiding secrets and living with bad character, it provides instability to those around you. It's not just wounding your own soul, it's wounding their soul because it's wounding your soul. Like by withholding things from people and things that you've done from those around you, you're living in a lie, they're living in a lie. I can clearly remember this church that I was pastoring on the Gold Coast. There was one gentleman who came to see me during a pastoral catch up, and he had come to the Lord. He was a genuine believer. He had come from a loosely Catholic background, not very serious, but then married a Christian girl and like had his life drastically changed. But he was still struggling with the guilt from the sins that he'd committed in his previous life. And you could see it because he would like be in catch-ups with me, and he would have questions and not have answers and struggle with the guilt and not be able to like bring it out. He couldn't actually verbalize it, externalize it, until I gave him the ultimatum one day. I said, bro, you've got to tell me what's going on. Like you've got to tell me, because this is killing you. I can tell you that I can see that it's killing you on the inside, and it's causing more and more damage as you sear your conscience and like prolong this thing. And so it came out, he shared it with me, that he had seen a prostitute when they were engaged. And so it was then the process of me like strongly encouraging him to share that with her. And he eventually shared that with her, and other things that had taken place. And in that moment, I remember the day that he was going to share it with her, he called me and he's like, do I have to? Do I have to? Do I really have to? And I could have in that moment said, no, you don't have to, if you feel from the Lord. But I was like, yes, you have to. Like yes, absolutely. If you don't, like this is gonna perpetuate and it's gonna get worse. Yes, you have to. And so he did. And he was scared that the marriage would end, that he wouldn't see his child anymore. And instead, what happened was that God honored his decision to come to light, and she forgave him. And they worked through that together with marriage counseling. But my point is, like, hiding secrets and living in bad character doesn't just wound your own soul; it wounds others as well.
Yeah.
Because this woman, she felt like she was living a lie always. She felt it, like she knew that something was up. She didn't know what it was. She knew something was off, but she couldn't put a finger on it. And she always felt like they had a relational distance, that they struggled. And that his wounds, his secrets, were actually providing instability to her and wounding her in ways that he wasn't even aware of and that she wasn't even aware of.
Yeah.
And so I think it's, realizing that it's hurting others as well, and that our decisions impact others. Like, if you think about it, people will tend to find out what you've done. Like, I think there are many secrets that people like hide, and they're able to successfully hide it for their whole lives until they die. But then, like, there are many other cases where the secrets are found. Sooner or later, the people close to you and the people you're hurting, they will find out. And I think it'll lead to so much more damage and destruction than if you had just shared it earlier, right when it happened, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
But
for
realizing
sure.
that, like, other people's lives are at stake. Your decisions in the past and the present have affected them and are affecting them. The trauma you're carrying is affecting them. You get impatient, you keep falling into porn, you get angry, you get violent, you get snappy. Those are just external manifestations of the trauma that is like has occurred inside of you, and it's negatively affecting those around you.
Yeah. So yeah, I think something that I have been thinking about as well is off the back of that story. There's a lot of we're talking a lot about kind of really massive character issues, things that involve keeping huge secrets and keeping, um, and engaging in probably things that the average person would frown at. But I think one thing, maybe for the sake of clarity, because I think you and I are already sort of speaking with this undertone in mind, is maybe shifting the conversation in the direction of the fruits of the Spirit and sort of talking about how the fruits of the Spirit, in at least from my opinion, it feels like the fruits of the Spirit are generally neglected
Mm,
and understated, underthought of in I guess at least the Western church scenario.
yeah.
We see in a lot of maybe the more conservative churches, there's this kind of, I guess I would call it Bible bashy, forced perspective, believe what I believe, or thee shall be damned to hell kind of thinking and approach to communicating Christ. And I think that seems to deal a lot of damage to, like you said, imaging Christ and communicating the image of Christ and relaying and embodying the image of Christ. Because if we read through a lot of the Gospels, there was there was only sort of a couple of accounts where Jesus was actually showing any, I would say, intensity behind his actions as well as his words. There's the moments where he's flipping tables, and then we read in the book of Mark, there's moments where he's displaying sadness or anger or something like that. But generally, it's he's filled with compassion. He's filled
Mm,
with peace. He's filled with trying to make amends, trying to join hands with people. And I feel like that's lost quite a bit.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think what we were just talking about and what you just said aren't so dissimilar,
Mm,
because the root is the same. Um, Let me expand by saying that someone of a good character is someone that has love as a core interest, or their love is at the heart of everything they do. Um, the reason why Jesus spoke with, at times, brashness towards the Pharisees was because he was doing it in love towards those who were oppressed. He was defending the oppressed from the oppressors. And so I think, like, love was at the heart of his motivation there, in the same way that love has to be at the heart of, you know, how you live transparently. The reason why you don't live transparently is because you're preserving yourself and you're not prioritizing the good of the other. That's essentially the same thing as saying, um, you know, the reason why we at times can speak with firmness is because we're doing it in love towards those who are being oppressed, um, and against the oppressors. So I agree that nowadays there is a certain circle, a certain tribe in church circles where brash, like, it's not done in love. It's done with an objective in mind. It's done to propel ministry, to get bigger churches, to sound good as a preacher. Like, all of those things are selfish motives. They're not they're not done in love towards the other. Um, and I think as well, just as on a similar tone to that, um, we tend to excuse people's good character for their gifting. Or sorry, we excuse their bad character for their gifting. We see this, I think, in the church a lot today. Um, and that's been intensified with, the internet and social media, YouTube, Instagram. You got TikTok preachers, where, you know the way you sound and the way you deliver your message and the way you preach is more emphasized or more valued than the character of your life. And we, as the consumers, we, as the church or the observers, we give people a pass because they're talented preachers or they're gifted prophets or they're incredibly knowledgeable with the word. I think like that is completely putting upside down the values of the kingdom. God doesn't care how gifted you are. He cares about you as a person more than what you're doing. In fact, what you do has to come from who you are. And so if I'm aligning myself with God's values and how he sees the world, then for me, I don't care how gifted you are as a preacher or how gifted you are in the prophetic or how gifted you are at healing people. The primary attribute that I'm looking for in you is virtue, not a skill. Are you trustworthy? Are you ethical? Are you principled? Are you integrous? Are you honest? Can I trust you? You could preach like Billy Graham and have the work ethic of Steve Jobs, but if you don't have a good character, then all your work is in vain. Like it reminds me of what Paul says in First Corinthians. He's like, if I speak in tongues, speak in tongues of men or of angels, or I think he says that have not love, you're a resounding gong or clanging cymbal. If you have a gift of prophecy and you understand all of the mysteries of the world, you have not love, you're nothing. That really is at its core what we're talking about. Good character, in my view, is love applied. So that's how I'd put it. Good character is love applied.
Cool. Yeah, I really like that summary. I think one question that I had from actually a mutual friend of ours, Oliver,
Mm,
he posed a really interesting question, and I think you've just answered it already, which is, how would you surmise good character in a sort of a single lens or a single idea? And I
yeah,
think that Christ's love applied is probably a really good way of
yeah,
applying it, right? Because
yeah,
you've got the definition of Christ's love, which you can see being acted out all through the Gospels, and then the application. Paul tends to talk a lot about in his epistles, right? His epistles are filled with
yeah,
all the different ways that the churches are loving or are not loving. And then you start to develop that framework.
yeah,
There's, speaking of Paul's writing, in Romans 5, there's a interesting development in verses 3 and 4 where Paul talks about how suffering creates perseverance, and perseverance creates good character, and then
yeah,
good character creates hope.
yeah,
Now, I think the suffering perseverance section is probably pretty self-explanatory. You go through some trials, you get better at going through trials as you trust more in Christ, and so on and so forth. But through your experience, how has it looked with those further conjunctions of then the perseverance creates good character, and then the good character creates hope?
yeah. I think at the heart of it, it's trusting. It's the key is trusting in God because you have a promise from God that you haven't seen fulfilled yet. You have to persevere in good in doing what you know to be right based on the character and example of Christ, um, and trust that He will vindicate you. That's the perseverance, I think, where you have done what God requires of you and spoken the truth and lived in good character, but you haven't seen the reality of it come to fruition yet. The reality of the promise come to fruition yet. Um, so if we think about people who live in a bad character with like bad character, and that's the tendency and pattern of their life, and the solution to that, number one, we know it's not to keep it in, like to hide it, to mask it, to keep in secrets. Um, and I think to another extreme, it's not to tell the whole world either. Like that's another extreme. But the solution is to trust in God and His ways, and that's why perseverance is so key there. You don't try and like prioritize yourself and preserve your reputation. You're actually turning to God and saying, God, I'm trusting in you and in your ways, even though right now I don't see a way out of this. You tell me that you're going to honor me if I live uprightly, but I don't feel honored, and I don't feel like you're upholding me. You know, I just sat down with my husband and told him that I've been cheating on him, and how is it that you're going to vindicate me through this? How is it that me walking in the light is going to prove to be the right thing to have for me to have done in that moment? Um, and so I think, like, that there should be a point in every Christian's life where they sit down. Everything is brought to the light, like everything. you know, um, porn, cheating, murder, stealing, swearing, gambling, drugs, pedophilia, like you name it. It doesn't matter what the sin is or what the consequence could be. No holding back, because that's a lived experience of trusting God in his ways. Um, he may not get you out of jail if you've been abusing children, but he will bring a peace on the inside, in time, as your heart heals, and as you try and reconcile and apologize for the things that you've done. Like, we're using extremes here, but I do firmly believe that, like, there is no sinner that is too far gone. You could have done the most horrific thing that is imaginably possible, but like, God can still, help you to come to terms with what you've done and to bring a peace that surpasses all understanding, and to restore you as an individual. But you've got to be willing to persevere. That's the key verse that you were just like, alluding to. You've got to be willing to persevere, and follow God in his ways. Trust that if what he says is true and his promise is true, it will come to fruition, and you will be restored as an individual. Um, so, yeah, I think, disregarding the consequences and trusting that God will honor you when you make, good character decisions. Now, that could be like, there are two ways you could make good character decisions. It's like, either you're faced with the possibility or the option of doing like something that is sinful or harmful towards others, and in good character, you turn away from that and you choose to trust God. It's like, I've got all these opportunities, all these possibilities, all these things in front of me that, are being presented, and I could easily take the shortcut or do like a bad character, make a bad character decision, and just grab hold of these things, like Adam and Eve grabbed hold of the apple, or not the apple, the fruit. Um, or it could be a situation where you have already done something, um, that is of bad character, and you've now got to do the right things to amend it. It's both of those things there, where the Christian has to, yeah, like, trust God, and persevere in trusting God, and trust that his promises will come to fruition, um, if you're living in good character. So, yeah,
Mm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but those are
Yeah,
my thoughts
yeah,
on
it
that.
does. I think there's this interesting kind of development with the idea of good character producing hope as well, on top of what you're saying, because it's funny. The internet has kind of coined this phrase. I don't know if you sort of saw it around a lot. It was on like Facebook or YouTube. Whenever we see videos of something wholesome happening, there might be comments saying, "Oh, a hope restored in humanity," or "my faith is
Yeah.
restored in humanity," or something like that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that actually really, really neatly speaks to what's going on in this verse,
Yeah.
where, if we imagine a world where everyone is slowly but surely growing in their perseverance and growing in their good character, then as more and more of these people sort of start to appear, you start to have hope for the life on Earth, right? One of the problems that I think a lot of our generation is facing is we don't want to bring kids into this world
Mm.
because, we're wrestling with, the internet has brought to light so many things now. We're wrestling with so many ideas now. There's the economy, there's the environment, there's the political state of the world, there's this, that, and the other. So many things that we've sort of now been forced to really wrestle with in our generation.
Mm.
And we don't, I think for a lot of us, we don't have a lot of hope that our children are going to experience the joyful life that we've got to experience.
Yep.
But I think there's that cool idea of if we all work together to make more people like Jesus, increase in good character, that can also increase our hope for the world and increase our
Totally.
hope for the future.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think of hope, I think of um, primarily of God's activity in the world. Because we feel hopeless when we perceive God not to be doing anything, or when we think that God's done with us, or with the world, or with those around us. Whereas you feel hopeful when you have a really strong sense that God isn't done with you, and that God isn't done with those around you, and that God isn't done with the world. And He's still acting, He's still moving, He's still working. Um, we feel most hopeless when we think this is beyond restoration. And that's really just a lie disguising itself as saying God's not working in this situation anymore. He's stepped aside, he's stepped back, he's not interested. And um, I think that's a really important point that Paul brings up and that you share as well about like the nature of hope and how it relates to a good character. Because if you're persevering and trusting in God's ways, and if you're doing that, in the way of Christ, then you can know that like God is working. He's working in you. He's working in those around you, and there will be a time where, um, you will have greater character than you had before, and you will see circumstances turn around. You'll see, situations be restored, relationships have restoration, forgiveness, love, where there was no hope for that before. For sure, I think hope is really key.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess because we've been discussing so many of those huge character flaws and sort of those bigger fallout problems, the one thing that I want to sort of get a conversation going about is talking about maybe some of the smaller, hidden, more insidious kind of, you don't really see them coming. And I guess I can start off by presenting my example. So there's one thing that I have always really I struggle with this a bit myself but it sort of manifests differently, but it's something that I feel like I've had to deal with quite a lot that doesn't really get spoken about much, which is reliability.
Mm.
Now, in my case, I'm not awfully reliable when it comes to doing things like chores around the house. I tend to find myself a fairly distracted person. My wife is well and truly convinced that I have ADHD. Considering that she was a psych major, I feel like I should probably pay attention to what she's saying. But um, yeah, I mean, I can sit for 5 hours straight and do something that I'm interested in, but when it comes to doing, 20 minutes of mopping the floors or something like that. But yeah, the reliability is something that I think has this capability to secretly poison the well a little bit. In
Mm.
my case, I have a lot of friends, mostly non-Christian, but even Christian, who I really struggle to deal with them and like wrangle them in and to be able to get a hold of them or to get them to honor their word in any way. And there'd be examples where something like, I would plan an event with some friends, and then one of those friends would just say, "Oh, I actually have something else that I want to go to all of a sudden." And there's like this weird element of, "Oh, I thought we were gonna spend time together. I thought we were gonna do something together," or, "Oh, yeah, like I was gonna come along and hang out, but I forgot I have something else on at this time all of a sudden," or like an hour into when they were meant to arrive.
Mm,
And that I've found has been this really slight kind of poisoning over time, over and over and over again, where now if someone has serious reliability issues, I um I'm very quick to distance myself with how I deal with them.
mm,
And it's something that I think has really struck me in an odd way. And I always thought, oh, I just need to be more patient, and I just need to be more pardoning, and I just need to be more willing to just forgive them.
mm,
But I think rather than just like, obviously, I'm still trying to exercise forgiveness as much as possible.
mm.
There's this element of me where I've gone, oh man, this is actually not just a small thing. This is an entire character flaw. This is a problem.
Yeah.
And if I bring this into an extreme example, if you think about someone who, if you're in a moment where you desperately need some sort of important Christian counseling, like desperately, desperately, maybe, your wife has decided she's turned away from the faith or something like that. You're in real desperate need of some sort of counseling. You have two friends. You have one friend who is a brilliant counselor, but really, really hard to get a hold of or get time with or be able to get them to honor their word. And then you have someone who's like maybe not as good of a counselor, but you can rely on them to be there
Mm,
for you.
mm.
I think I wouldn't even second guess it. Or, if I'm in
Yeah.
an emergency and I need someone to take me to the hospital, I'm not going to call the person who may or may not be able to answer their phone every now and then. I'm going to call the person who will answer their phone, even if the trip's going to take longer.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, to speak to the reliability, I think it's culture to culture. Different cultures have different rules about unspoken rules about what's reliable and what's unreliable, and even within friendship circles, there are some more casual approaches and some more, um, uh, you know, some with higher expectations. But I think that if we're speaking to it like generally, it's an issue that um, Gen Z is struggling with. It's a deep difficulty to commit. I don't know. Are you Gen Z?
I think it depends on who you ask.
What year were you born? 95?
95. I think that technically falls into Gen Z. I think that's right at the beginning.
I thought Gen Z was 98 onwards.
Maybe. I don't know. I've heard all different stories about
Yeah.
where it is. I don't know.
Yeah. Gen Z and those close to Gen Z tend to struggle with non-committal, like being non-committal. Um, and I mean, there are all sorts of social studies that, you know, could pinpoint the reason why. But if we're bringing light to some of the character flaws that are not as big or as in your face, or as significant in consequences, and we're showing some of the other ones as well that we live, and go through on a daily basis. Yeah, I think there's um, a bunch of ones that bunch of things that we do that we don't even realize, like, this isn't the character of Christ. This isn't being a person who's reliable and committed like Jesus was. Um this isn't I spoke a harsh word to my wife and I didn't even say sorry.
Mm,
you know um being first to say sorry and being first to forgive, like, those are like little things that we do on a daily basis that point to where we're at in our character.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful thing about the concept of forgiveness, right? Is, that obviously the realm of reprimand, and honestly, that's everything in Christianity is just like a balance. You're trying to strike a balance of, how do I reprimand someone for their poor behavior, but also doing so in a way that comes across loving and so on. And sometimes we make mistakes in that regard. And the amazing thing about forgiveness is that if you're truly, truly remorseful about your actions, the mistake is forgiven. And
Mm,
there's the pursuit of love will be filled with mistakes and will be filled with scenarios like that where we overshoot or undershoot, but then we have that opportunity of forgiveness to be able to say, look, I'm trying my best to pursue good character, to pursue the character of Christ. And I undershot here and I apologize and I'm sorry. And then that's when we learn to course correct over time. It's never about
yeah.
waiting until you have the perfect balance to strike. Sometimes you just have to strike to learn what the balance looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, we shouldn't overthink it and allow God to work in and through us as we journey through life in a spontaneous way. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Awesome. I guess from here, I think I've exhausted a lot of the questions and the points that I have.
Mm.
Is there anything that you have sort of felt like, if you desperately wanted to communicate the concept of good character, um what do you feel like are vital points, vital ideas, vital summaries of this topic?
Um, I think it's just the what I mentioned at the start, that having a good character is embodying the actions, the attitudes of Christ. Um, Having a good character is love applied. Really, it's love at the core. Love for God, love for others. Um, Thinking about the lie that the alternative to a good character presents to you, that you can avoid the consequences, or that you can embrace shortcut benefits without consequences. Um, and I think the lie is that, no, you're actually just, there are other consequences that are taking place, that you're creating. You're wounding yourself and your soul, and causing deep problems in your own heart. You're wounding those around you, and let's face it, you've then got to face God as well in the afterlife. Let's say, you live a whole life of bad character. You've got to then face God and come to terms with that. But I think overall, the importance of it can't be understated because it's so tied to humility and love, which is the central theme of the Christian life. And I also want to say that, like, people might listen to this and they might come to the end of it feeling a little bit like, how, like, how do I even do this? Like, a little bit frustrated that we've talked about all of these things, but they don't have the tools necessary to live a life of good character. Um, and I just want to say that, like, there are two things that God has empowered you with: to have a willing heart, to go through the heart work and the heartache at times of losing people and things in order to do the right thing and obey God. Number one, I think it's the Holy Spirit. Romans 8 is very clear that the Spirit intercedes, and in that context, it's talking about prayer. But the point that Paul is making is that the Spirit in the Christian's life makes all the difference on this side of eternity, where we have the promise of perfection, and yet we live in a broken arena. So that's the first thing: reliance upon the Spirit to do what you need to do and to obey and to walk in obedience, just as Jesus relied upon the Spirit to walk in obedience. And then I'd secondly say that, like, good character is rooted in the gospel. Like, just keep, like, looking to the gospel. if the gospel is that Jesus relinquished all of his rights and all his preferences and privileges and power, like to serve us, and he's now the crucified and risen Lord, then that means that like whatever you've done is forgiven and you can be transparent about it. And you've got a living example of how to live a good character life. And if you call him your Lord, then you're ultimately saying his ways are the best ways. And he is the boss of all bosses. And he gets to decide how I should live. So I'm going to come under his lordship and live as the human being that I want. And the blessing of the gospel, which to me, the gospel is that Jesus is Lord. Like that's the gospel. You know, the blessing is that it's such a relief that Jesus is Lord, because you wouldn't want any other Lord to be Lord.
Yeah.
The fact that Jesus is so good and has such a good character, and he's so gracious towards you and kind and understands and empathetic, um, it's such a beautiful thing for those trying to have a good character. Because when they fail to have a good character, they don't look up and see someone that's frowning or disappointed or frustrated. They see someone who lived it and someone who empathizes with them and someone who says, get back up, let's go.
Mm.
So yeah, that's all I would say. Not only
Yeah.
to summarize, but then also, how do you have a good character? The spirit and the gospel.
Yeah,
It's
I think
really
that's a really awesome way to sort of put a bow on the top, is to have it all in perspective of God, right? There's the amazing and awesome part of having the perspective of God in there, which is that he's so loving and forgiving and perfect at making a path for us to imitate him more and more. But then there's also that kind of more intense, I guess, humbling aspect where we have to answer for all of these things eventually. So if we
yeah,
don't take his way, then we've got a more difficult way waiting for us. So we may as well
absolutely.
put the effort and the work in to imitate him now, rather than face the accumulation of those consequences in front of the Lord when, when we pass.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, or even at the end of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's a great place to end it.
yeah.
Thanks so much for hopping on. It's been actually really, really good for a first episode. I was surprised about how easily this flowed. So awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Nah, absolute pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.